Hi, welcome back to GOPO. Today we're going to finish up Chapter 7, the bureaucracy. We're going to explain how the bureaucracy is in part of the policymaking process and how they can also be held in check by Congress, the president, and the courts. So, looking at them making policy, they are the key implementers of policy. But getting to policy is very complex and ever changing because they have to do several things, whether it's a court decision or an executive order or a law passed through Congress or dealing with budgetary things. They have a lot of things they have to do once they get that policy. They have to get on the policy agenda and figure out if they can get anything. They have to get it debated and passed and see how much money they can actually get. So once these bureaucratic agencies, let's say for instance, like the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, wants funding for regulations of different corn supplies for farmers. They have to hope and pray they can even get the problem fixed through the government and getting that policy before they actually get it implemented. And this is basically showing you it's a constant circle of policymaking. There's so many things they have to do. We have to see what the problem is, hope that they can get on the agenda, whether in the courts or with the president or with Congress. And then once they get that policy, actually forming it, getting money to help put it into play, then actually putting it into play. And then after it's implemented, they evaluate it and they're like, okay, do we need to fix the problem more or do we just end this whole thing altogether? So their main function, like I just stated, is implementing policy, which is putting into action the policies that are passed. For example, laws passed by Congress, but it's super complicated because new policies are introduced into a body of existing policies. So they have to figure out how it might fit into these policies already put in play. Let's say it was something given to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and it was about cleaning up coal emissions, but they already had something in play about that, but now it's something even more specific. And sometimes these policies might be really vague and hard for them to understand, or even super complex and hard to understand. So because of that, it kind of leads to what's known as bureaucratic discretion, where the bureaucrats look at the policy and they're like, well, it probably means this, and we have an idea of what to do best. So they might not follow it to a T. They have discretion on how to do it, what they feel is the right way to do it, because it might be more efficient or cost saving. They're the experts. They know better. And then, of course, they can also bureaucrats have the power to create regulations, which is something that the bureaucrats pass that have to kind of piggyback off of a law. So, for instance, right now, there's over 40,000 regulations in making a cheeseburger, which is insane to think about. But if you think of all the toppings, and there's ones for meat, there's ones for cheese, there's one for pickles, there's one that if you want to name ketchup fancy, you have to put it on a board that's at I want to say 69-degree angle. And if it slides down too quickly within a 30-second period, you can't call it fancy. I mean, that's the type of stuff we're talking about. They make regulations for. The bureaucracy makes those because they have better understanding and expertise in those areas than maybe members of Congress. So there's different types of bureaucratic agencies. I already talked about the first type, the cabinet. The next type is called an independent regulatory agency. And just think about what that is. They are independent. They each have their own agenda, and they regulate certain areas. So some examples of an independent regulatory agency would be like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They regulate what's going on with food and drugs. And then you've got the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Farms. That's their area that they regulate. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they regulate the stock market. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they regulate what's on the airwaves, okay, whether it's television or radio. So that's an example of how they are. The EPA, they're regulatory over the environment. So these people serve our country in these agencies. The third type of bureaucratic agency is an independent executive agency. They really don't fit into a category. NASA is probably the best example from it. But these independent regulatory agencies, that's the most common ones you're going to see. Um, they do have a lot of power, and they're definitely insulated from political influence because they don't necessarily have to get elected. None of them get elected. I'm going to skip that for now. So there are such things as politics within bureaucracy. We see this all the time because they kind of act as the court to settle disputes between Democrats and Republicans. This is called bureaucratic education. Sorry, that was so bad. Um, Adjudication. Thank you. There it is. Oh my gosh. One of those mornings, right? So this is adjudication is where you're kind of like a mediator. You're the one that like settles disputes, try to be the neutral parties. And basically they're the ones that try to do it from like an objective, unbiased point of view. So members of the American bureaucracy, they definitely represent the people more accurately, like demographically, geographically, race, ethnicity, that kind of stuff. But another way to make sure that they are unbiased, there's this thing called the Hatch Act that says any civil servant, which is a member of a bureaucratic agency, cannot get involved in political campaigns. And it's a way to like basically, you don't want them to look biased. Are they going to have biases? Absolutely. Every person in the world has opinions on things, but on politics too. But they can't openly do those things. They can't openly participate in someone's campaign. They can't openly donate money to people's campaigns because the whole purpose is they have to be separate from these partisan politics. So the last thing we're going to look at is when they finally try to implement something and they have to say, okay, we've implemented this program, we're going to evaluate it. They're basically saying, did we meet the objectives this policy told us we had to meet? And basically, who is the one that kind of decides whether that's good or not is Congress. Remember the elbow? Those are the three jobs of Congress. L, legislate, B, budget. This is the O in elbow, oversight. And this is where they can kind of look at, okay, they are doing it, we'll keep it going, or this is not working at all, this was terrible, we're just going to get rid of it. And then the courts can also use judicial review to like get rid of some stuff too. All right, I'm going to skip that. We're going to go on to the last section. This is how the three branches of government keep the fourth branch in line. Okay, so here we go again, talking about the O and elbow for what Congress does. They check on the bureaucracy with oversight. So they basically, you can think about it like the Congress has this baby. This is like Obamacare. That's their baby. And they have to give it off to the executive branch to implement. And they want to make sure their child is doing okay. So every 6 months, it could be 3 months, the number is arbitrary. They will call in the top dogs from that bureaucratic agency. So in this case, that would be the Department of Health and Human Services. And they would say, hey, how is our baby doing? How is the Obamacare doing? Is it getting implemented? Do you need more money? I noticed this isn't working well. What are you going to do to fix it? Hey, if you don't fix it, we're going to take away money, stuff like that. So that's their way of kind of making sure that they're getting the job done. The president, of course, can check the bureaucracy. The president is we call this the chief administrator. He's the top dog. He's like the superintendent of the bureaucracy. And he decides basically who can be the top dogs. He can hire and fire the top leaders of all of these bureaucratic agencies. And, for instance, President Trump has done that many times with his cabinet members. He's on his third Department of Homeland Security secretary. He can do that with any of them. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll be in control of them because it's like, if you're not going to propose and set forth my agenda, you're gone. You got to follow my administrative goals. And if you're not doing that, I'm getting rid of you. It's really hard for them, though, to control the lower levels because civil servants are just hired like you and I would be for a normal job. Like if you're going to work at Johnny K's or something, like that's how a civil servant's hired. You interview. Now they have to take like a merit test to see if like they're qualified. And then if they are, congratulations, you get a job. The president really can't fire those people. But this, I want you guys to look at in your book and kind of depict the political cartoon. I want you to describe the what is expressed, the viewpoint expressed, and you can see it's an octopus. But look at specifically what the tentacles of are of the octopus and where the octopus is starting. That's my clue. All right. So how's another way that Congress can check the bureaucracy? Well, anytime the president makes a plum book appointment, meaning like the top positions in the bureaucracy, they have to approve it. The Senate has to approve his appointees. The best example is secretaries. They do that usually right away. They can also at any point create, because remember the Congress, they're the makers, they're the creators. So they can create an agency, they can create a program, they can get rid of an agency, and they can get rid of a program. So that's part of it. And then, of course, the O and elbow, like I said, oversight. So like I said, they have those hearings where they basically say, how are you doing? Make sure you're doing what we want, or you're going to lose money for your program. The Congress also has something known as the Government Accountability Office, where it monitors if funds are being spent appropriately. So that's how they can oversee the bureaucracy, because they get budget money to spend to make their programs happen. And they are the ones that kind of keep them in check and keep them accountable. The judicial branch can also get involved. They might restrict or constrain the scope accepted of bureaucratic action. So, for instance, remember the bureaucracy has some discretion. So, like in this case of Michigan versus the EPA, the Clean Air Act was something that was passed in the 70s, okay? And it was, I'm sure you can guess, it was something that the EPA had to implement that was keeping the air clean, keeping pollutants out of the air. Well, in the case of Michigan versus the EPA, they were suing the EPA over their what they called like what's the word I'm looking for? Unobtainable, basically, emission regulations that they just couldn't obtain. And the SCOTUS said they overturned their limit on these things that were emitted by the coal-fired power plants. So basically, it challenged the private sector challenged this, and it was costing them way too much money. And so they basically said this, what the EPA was doing, as Justice Scalia said at the time, was unreasonable. Like it just was, they were asking way too much. So this is an example where the judicial branch came in and said, EPA, you're losing some of your power. And the media, how can the media be involved? Well, the public opinion basically can restrain a little bit or can put pressure on some of these agencies. So the best example is with Hurricane Katrina. People were really upset that the federal agency FEMA, who was supposed to go down there and help, wasn't helping that well. And then people saw this in the news and then they got upset about it. And then FEMA got criticized. And that's when usually Congress comes in and they're like, okay, the public doesn't like FEMA. Maybe we should look into what they're doing. So what happened was, now this is where sometimes people see, I don't like what the bureaucracy is doing, so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. This is kind of that participatory government. It's also pluralism as well, because people started doing their own thing. They're like, I don't like what the government's doing. We're going to participate and clean up Katrina. That's participatory. And then we also see, well, I don't like what these are doing. So groups decided to go and help. That's pluralism, like Habitat for Humanity and the Minnesota Helpers drove down and helped out. In Walmart helped out, again, a private organization helped out with Hurricane Katrina because they weren't necessarily happy with FEMA. Now, there were people that were happy. They're like, okay, we're doing well. Hang on. Any student who has second. Sorry about that. Okay. So, but there were people that did like FEMA. Like FEMA actually did this thing where they gave people debit cards with, I think, about $500 on it to like help them through things. But some people saw that and didn't like it because they were getting, a lot of people took advantage of that, where they were either selling them or they were using it to not buy necessities, but to buy like alcohol and cigarettes and even go to strip clubs with it. So people like were praising them for doing this, but at the same time, they're like, okay, there's scams and people are taking advantage of it. So sometimes people think it's good. Sometimes people think it's bad. Sometimes when they see stuff like this, they're like, okay, we need something implemented a little bit better, more efficiently, stronger. But at the same time, we don't want them to be too strong. Yeah, we're very fickle like that, us Americans. All right, so that's it. This is remember how I said Walmart, they got involved? Look at that. That's so cool. Helping out, giving relief. Again, sometimes when FEMA is not doing something or a bureaucratic agency isn't doing something, the people can get involved. So even though you see that as a negative, at the same time, it's a positive because it gets more Americans wanting to get involved too. All right, that's it for bureaucracy. That's it for Unit 2, our political institutions. So you'll be tested on this soon. Good luck.